The museum has said the painting was not removed because it was racist, but has confirmed that it has no plans to re-hang it. And last year, the Tate Modern decided to... Actually, it was the Tate Britain decided to permanently close its splendid restaurant after deciding that the mural by Rex Whistler featuring two slave boys painted nearly a century ago is too offensive for modern diners. JJ Charlesworth is an art critic. Welcome back to the programme. Good to see you again. How do you feel about the removal of Love Amongst the Nations?
I think it's a bit of a problem because it starts to show that curators have a very particular take on what they find unacceptable now in artworks which are part of their historical collections. I think if you look at it carefully, and I think the problem with taking artworks out of public view is that you don't get to have any kind of discussion thereafter about them, is that it's not by any means a racist painting, right? It has figures which are stylized and caricatured. They're quite cartoonish, and they are part of Spencer's style, which is by that point quite interested in a sort of naive, cartoonish way of depicting people. But I think that the important point is that the piece itself is about reconciliation and love between nations, races and cultures. So it's a rather strange thing to only see that the fact that the way he depicted people in 1935 doesn't meet up to the standards that we have for depiction today. I think that's a real issue.
I'm almost more revealing than the fact that they've removed the painting altogether now is what the label used to say before it was removed. None of Spencer's human subjects escaped this taste for the grotesque, but the painting shows how this broadly misanthropic outlook intersected with an unquestioned racism. Raised on the moral rightness of British imperial rule, Spencer imagined civilization firmly in the West and savagery in its colonies. New conversations are developing around the status of paintings like this one. This museum is part of the University of Cambridge. I mean, I think, if you saw an essay like that, you would give it a gamma because it is full of assertion and not full of evidence. I don't know much about Stanley Spencer, but the little I do know about him was that he was a very devout Christian.
Yes.
To describe this man as misanthropic seems to me absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, no.
But his paintings celebrate humanity. Here was the fellow who was commissioned to paint the great war chapels, his splendid paintings of the wounded coming back from the Great War, in which, by the way, he served with great distinction. This man is now to be described as a misanthrope.
Yes, I think that's where it becomes really troublesome. And I think it's a real issue now with the way in which curators think their role is to criticise and condemn rather than actually to explain and contextualise for a visitor what an artist's work is about. I mean, I think, as you say, that particular statement is so full of critical conjecture and assumption, and presumption about what is going through an artist's head. It's that you kind of do wonder what curators think their role is now when it comes to explaining historical works, and that really is an issue because that statement is rather bizarre. Partly also because it doesn't even try to acknowledge the sentiment or the intention or the meaning of the painting as it's set out. All it sees is that here's someone who, after all, practically didn't leave the UK in his life, apart from fighting in the First World War, where his brother was killed, and he served in the Annabelance Corps for over 2 years in Macedonia. And you kind of wonder, for someone who's in the 1930s and who hasn't particularly travelled, the images that he's going to get of people who are actually at that time colonial subjects, let's not forget. We have to remember that it's also a statement that is against the very racist ideology of empire that still dominated in the 1920s and 30s. So you have to kind of ask yourself, well, of course, he's quite naive and ignorant in the sense that he's not particularly well versed in how people appear. But what is really an issue is that throwing all that out, or casting that aside, and then simply kind of criticising an artist in the text that is supposed to be relatively informative and neutral does tell us that something has changed radically in the way in which curators are seeing what they should do with artworks and how we should understand them.
On the other hand, I found this on the internet. There are two paintings that were side by side, Love Among the Nations and also Love on the Moor. They're a matching pair, part of Spencer's unrealised church house project, conceived in the 1930s, partly under the influence of the free love movement of the time. Their erotic nature has parallels in poetry and fiction of the period. Think about D.H. Lawrence. And the church house paintings attracted very similar controversy when they were first exhibited. I mean, I might have found that a more useful context, quite honestly, than the label that was exhibited.
I mean, I think that also what it throws out, casts out, is the fact that artists are often quite unusual people, quite eccentric in their views. Stanley Spencer, of course, actually did offend quite a lot of people for the relatively sort of libertine sort of style and approach to content, especially nude content, and the mixing of this kind of erotic content with his own kind of devout Christianity as he kind of saw it. So it is very much of its time, and I think it's more important to think about, well, how do we understand artists in their context at a given moment, rather than read back onto them the kinds of preoccupations and concerns that we have today.
JJ, you have helped us to understand, you've helped us to understand the context. JJ Charlesworth. Coming up, it's Loved by the Royal Family, the British Army and James Bond.